Now we're going to move from communication into social skills. We're going to discuss foundational skills, understanding and using nonverbal communication, conversational skills with our learners with autism, and relating to people, events, and objects. Again, we've touched on this briefly, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these topics. So what exactly are social skills? The skills we use every day to interact with the world around us. So this includes both verbal and nonverbal. This can be vocal conversation, body language, or even facial expressions. So we need social skills in order to access our world, such as going to the grocery store, ordering food at a restaurant, maintaining friendships and relationships. We talked about how social skills are often difficult for our students with autism. So we need to understand that they need more support to access the world. Next, we're going to talk about foundational skills. Foundational skills are the basics of social skills, and they're often deficits for our students with autism. Limited reciprocity could look like one-word answers or failure to have that natural back and forth and conversation flow. So for example, if you're talking with a person or a student with autism is engaged with a peer in conversation, they might not look like they're interested or paying attention or understanding because they might not respond to what the person is saying, and if they do, they will often turn the conversation into something that's of interest of them or those perseverative interests. Something to keep in mind is that our students with autism have a hard time processing and understanding emotions, and so therefore they have a hard time empathizing with other people. So that can also lead to those inappropriate reactions to certain events or stories. So if you're telling a student with autism something that's sad, they might not have anything to say, they might start talking about something of interest to them, or have an inappropriate reaction to whatever it is that you were saying. Another thing we want to learn about is joint attention, which I believe we touched on a little bit earlier, but to dive deeper into it, research shows that our students with autism have a hard time understanding joint attention or being able to follow joint attention. Joint attention is the ability to focus on another object or area with another person. So for example, if we're having a conversation and I say, "Look, it's right over there," a student with autism might have a hard time being able to listen and understand what you're saying, but also following where you're pointing at. Joint attention is important to communication and language learning. Joint attention therapy focuses on improving specific skills related to shared attention, such as pointing, showing, and coordinating looks between person and an object. Body language and facial expressions
Understanding
are
and
nonverbal
using
cues that are often
nonverbal
hard for our
cues.
learners with autism to understand.
So body language and
Nonverbal
facial
cues
expressions
going
are
on around
nonverbal
us
cues that
all
are
the
often
time,
hard for
and
our
they're
students
easy
to
for you and I to
understand
pick
or
up
engage
on,
in.
and we're always looking for
Nonverbal
them.
cues are happening
However,
around us
our
all the
students with
time, and we are
autism
constantly
struggle with
looking at those
imitation
around us to
skills,
watch for
and
these
therefore
cues
are
to
not
assess
learning through imitation
situations.
in their surroundings
However,
like
many
others.
students with
So
autism
it makes
struggle
sense that
with
they would
imitation
miss cues
skills,
such as
and
facial
therefore they're not
expressions and body
learning through
language that tell us how
imitation
a
in
person's
their
feeling
surroundings
and
like
understanding
many
what they're
others do.
saying.
So
So
it makes
many
sense
students
that they
have
would miss
abnormalities
cues from
in
facial
eye
expressions and body
contact
language
or
that tell
eye
us how a
gaze.
person is
They may
feeling and
struggle to
understanding
look
what
at
they're trying
people,
to say.
and they may
Many
have a
students
hard time
have
holding eye contact,
difficulty with
or
eye
that could look
contact
like
or eye
holding eye
gaze. They
contact
may
for
struggle
too
to look
long.
at people,
It's
and then
really hard
sometimes
for
they
our
might
students to
also
match
hold eye
nonverbal
gaze
cues
too
to
long.
situations. They might have a hard
Um,
time
and then
understanding that if you're
also
sad and you're telling a sad story, that
matching
your face
nonverbal
looks sad.
cues to
And they might have a hard
situations.
time matching
So
that
our
as
students will
well. So they
also
could look happy
struggle
while you're
with
telling a
their
sad
own
story.
face
It's just
expressions,
something
where
that our
when
students
somebody's
with autism
upset,
have
maybe
a
they're
hard
smiling
time
and
picking
laughing
up
because
and
they just do
understanding,
not
and they might need extra
understand
support
that
and
facial
prompting.
cue of crying or the upset face and what that means. And so oftentimes trying to match those nonverbal cues with certain situations can be difficult. So sometimes then that can be difficult with friends if they're laughing when somebody else is crying or hurt because they just don't understand the situation. And so again, their gestures might not match those conversations or activities to what their peers or adults are saying. And then one thing I want to mention about eye contact is that for a while we tried to force students with autism to make eye contact because we assume if they're not listening. But a lot of individuals on the spectrum have come out and said it hurts them to physically look at people, and it's so uncomfortable to their sensory system that it's painful sometimes. or really is dysregulating to them. So we just always like to say that just because a student isn't making eye contact doesn't mean they're not listening, and sometimes that can be really aversive for students, so we don't recommend forcing students anymore to make eye contact. And then again, when they're not picking up on cues that others aren't interested in a topic they're talking about or don't want to talk about, then that can be hard for our students, because our students can continue talking about their interests and not pick up those nonverbal cues from others that maybe the friend doesn't want to talk about that anymore, or they're not interested in that. So sometimes that can be hard in those relationships with peers.
In terms of conversational skills with our learners with autism, you might see some deficits as far as taking turns, being flexible with conversation, or they might even dominate conversations. It's easy for them to miss cues or when it's their turn to talk versus another person's turn to talk, and they might be unable to follow or stay engaged in a conversation, especially if it's about a topic that's not of interest to them or a topic that's not that perseverative interest. You might also see those one word or minimum answers, not realizing that someone is engaging in conversation with them. They might feel like they're talking next to somebody and not to somebody. And it's also common to see with our learners with autism a difficulty being able to join a group activity or game, and you might have to provide some extra support in those areas.